Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Sergi, for this organizing this interesting workshop. This is joint work with Hossein Kasai. He's also attending the workshop. He will be taking your questions, by the way. No, I'm kidding. And Jehun Xin, who couldn't be here today because he's in, I think it's some other personal commitments. We're going to talk today about flexibility in electricity markets. Flexibility is, of course, closely related to reliability because it's the ability to react, to reorganize when upon a contingency. And what we are interested in is how this ability to react in short notice could be traded. So it's very different from trading electricity, right? So markets trade electricity all the time. This is trading a different service, which is the ability to update or change the parameters of the exchange in a short notice. Okay, so let me start with telling you a little bit about a recent event that took place in Texas. So the market operator in Texas is called ERCOT. And we went through a really tough week earlier this year during February. We had a polar vortex, which is this phenomena that, you know, a large mass of cold air moves through continental US. It rarely gets down south to Texas, but it apparently does so with a certain periodicity, like once every 10 years or so. And so we had a major outage in the state. I was, for instance, my household was affected. We went on rotating outage for 4 days straight. So that meant that my house was close to 58 Fahrenheit. I mean, the heating couldn't, because the outages were intermittent, you know, so you're given power for a few minutes and then shut off for hours. So it maintains, you know, 50, you can live 58 Fahrenheit, but it's not pleasant. But other people were, you know, in other parts of the state, it was disaster. At some point, even the water utilities were unable to operate. So people were without power and without water. So you can imagine this is not nice. The interesting thing, though, is that the neighboring markets, and so if you can see the picture on the top right, the neighboring markets to Texas were not as badly affected. For whatever reason, maybe that they had a different, they were not as exposed to this phenomena, but places like New Mexico or even Oklahoma were not as heavily affected. But that didn't help at all Texas, because Texas is not, doesn't have a strong interconnection with neighboring markets. So if you can see here, in the United States, there are 3 major grids, meaning that these are power systems that are synchronized. So for all intents and purposes, this is like a single machine because they are synchronized. So all the generators in this area are work in tandem to provide electricity. And the state of Texas has very weak interconnection here and there. So weak that for all purposes, meaning for regulation in particular, the state of Texas is not subject to federal regulation. And so they can design the market as they like. And that is partly the political reason why the state of Texas is not heavily interconnected with other other markets. So the conclusion is that maybe the outage would have not been so bad had these transmission lines, if these transmission lines would have been available, because these other markets basically were able to deal with the contingency and were ready to export power into Texas. Okay, so Hence the interest in maybe now, I don't know if this is going to be reality, but maybe now the Texas legislature will consider interconnecting with neighboring markets. How coupling is done in other parts of the world? Well, coupling is very important. Coupling, by that I mean having the ability to schedule large exchange of power between markets. It's an important feature of electricity markets in Europe, for instance. So in Europe, we have all these regional, for instance, in the Iberic Peninsula, for Spain and Portugal, there is a single market operator that on a daily basis, it's charged of scheduling the power flows according to, solving some market clearing optimization problem that is receives as inputs the bids by generators and the utilities that are the demand side. And so there are interconnections between all these European countries, and the local markets are handled by the power exchanges, but then there is a coupling algorithm that takes place after all these local markets have settled to schedule large power exchanges between countries. This is very important because there are places like Denmark, for instance, that has oftentimes has a lot of surplus of wind power, and this is relatively cheap power. And so this intertie here, I'm going to switch it to red, generates sometimes significant flows, and these flows have to be adjusted, essentially handled by the rest of the market, because they may create potential technical issues of stability. And one way to handle this is by means of this market coupling design that they have, in which on a daily basis, these power exchanges take bids from their internal market participants, and then they just pass them along to this higher level market for exchanges between markets, and they run this algorithm called Euphemia. And it's a centralized algorithm. So at the end of the day, there is a local component, but it's basically the local imbalances are handled by the local power exchanges, but the large transactions or transfers between areas are handled by this centralized massive market clearing algorithm. Now, one of the features of this is that it uses a very simplified model of power flows. Electricity flows through according to Kirchhoff's laws, and so you have to take that into account when scheduling these power flows. So this market clearing algorithm that is done at the centralized level does not quite go the whole way to detailed modeling of the way power is going to flow. So they have instead a simplified model that is available transfer capacity, which essentially says, we're going to come up with an estimate of how much is feasible or reliable to transfer in a secure fashion from area A to area B, from area A to area C, or from B to C, and so on and so forth. Now, this is going to create troubles because this is just a simplified, highly stylized model, and the actual flows in reality may not, and in fact, oftentimes do not correspond to what this simplified model does. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done locally to bring back those exchanges to feasibility, right? So think of this as we push this information, economic information, up to the centralized market exchange, which computes these large-scale power flows between countries. And then the local power exchanges then have to figure out how to actually make that happen. And oftentimes this requires running plans in what people refer to in electricity markets as out of merit. So there are some plans that you are going to have to run, even though they are not economic, just to support the ability to schedule these large power exchanges. Okay, so In the US, we do have some market coupling, and it's between these two areas. This is the Midwest ISO, and this is the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland market, PJM. So these are massive electricity markets. And this picture shows what happened in that area that same week. You know, every place, it was almost a rare occurrence that almost the whole of the US was below 0 temperatures, except for Florida, of course. But everything else was freezing. And nonetheless, these markets seem to handle the emergency relatively well. One feature of this emergency is that there was a lot of flow from, let me use maybe blue, from PJM to MISO. So these numbers here, for instance, this number here shows that during the 16th of February, the actual exports from PJM to MISO reached 10,000 megawatts. So this is a significant amount of power that was being scheduled through the mechanism that they use in between these two markets to schedule exchanges. And as a result, Midwest ISO was able as well to export power into the Tennessee area. So this is another market here, the Southeast market, which would, I'm sure, as you see this, this is in this brown. This brown is the amount of power that was exported from Midwest ISO further down south, and I'm sure that helped a great deal to deal with the situation. So there were parts of the South, I mean, including Texas, as I just mentioned, that were in very bad shape. And the red is, this is a heat price heat map. So the redder, the higher the prices, and the bluer, the lower the prices. And so what this means is that that day, where we've been having outages in Texas, in the Northeast and in the Midwest, they were not having outages. They were actually having relatively normal conditions. And though this required significant power flows between these two markets. So how they do this? Well, they do this by means of this protocol. So they have a protocol called Coordinated Transaction Scheduling. And it involves these two market makers, PJM and MISO. And what they do is that they allow participants in their own markets to bid through proxy buses, so artificial nodes that are going to be put at the edges of their area of operation. And so it is as if you have some artificial generator all of a sudden that is located right at the edge of your area of service. And that generator can offer them into your market as any other internal generator. And then that's the way to handle that import activity. And conversely, exporting activity, if it is somebody who's willing to sell outside of the market. So here again, the limitations of this design is that, first off, this is done on a 2x2 basis. So it can only be PJM and MISO at the time, even though PJM also has a protocol with New York ISO, but they are done separately. And so it doesn't capture the potential gains that could involve three-way exchanges, right? It's always bilateral exchange between New York ISO, PJM and MISO. And it also has the problem of potential loop flow, meaning that these are artificial nodes. These are not in any way or form reflective of the actual physics of the network. And as a result, there might be flows in the network that do not correspond to what the economic clearing is alluding to. So there are these limitations on both schemes. You know, I would say that the basic limitation for this scheme is that it takes away a lot of control from the local power exchanges, and it does it at the expense of generating this artificial rendition of the market, which at the end is going to have to be dealt with at a cost. And in this one, it's well, the fact that this is done only on a 2-by-2 basis. You know, two markets have to talk to each other to schedule these transactions, and it also doesn't quite address the issue of the potential for loop flow. You know, the fact that the actual power flow may not correspond to the scheduled economic power flows. Okay, so this is a background on the problem that that we are interested in addressing. And it's essentially to design a market mechanism for coupling, for scheduling these exchanges between markets. And we don't want to sacrifice efficiency. That's, of course, the whole premise of electricity markets, is to try to find economically efficient ways of meeting market demand, but also to increase reliability, because as we saw, this is essentially a good example of this, right? The ability to schedule these flows was a way for the system as a whole to handle the very extreme situation that people were facing in the Southeast. The other key feature here in that what we are wanting to achieve is that we don't want to relinquish local control authority. We want to allow the market makers to be able to have control over their internal dispatch and not have to go through these artificial models like the available transfer capacity that at the end of the day are going to create troubles because you are going to have to when everything is done to make the dispatch feasible. So that's the problem. So let me then introduce a little bit of notation. We're going to use script A for the set of markets. So the idea here is that the agents are going to be market makers. And these market makers are running their own market clearing. Market clearing is an optimization problem that aims to identify what are the adjustments to power generation locally. So the market operator A has some generators indexed by G, and in response to a contingency, you want to reschedule the power that is to be generated by that generator, and we call that delta P. So to emphasize the fact that this is a change from what was originally scheduled. And this is what we are bringing to the table, is the ability to call upon also the interconnection lines and to schedule these changes in flows according through those interconnection lines to help alleviate or to help to deal with the contingency. And of course, you want to minimize an objective, which is typically something like cost or maximize economic efficiency or maximize the gains from trade. And all the while, you may have reliability constraints that you would want to enforce that are predetermined by maybe the regulator. Okay, so as I said, we would like to not come up with artificial constructs as to how electricity flows, and we're going to use nonetheless a simplified description of how electricity flows, which is the direct current approximation to power flow. Under the direct current approximation to power flow, the actual flow on the line A, so this is the pre-scheduled flow, which is the result, say, of a day ahead. The day before, the market has a clearing that with 24-hour anticipation, this was the amount that was supposed to be delivered. But now we're going to revise it, let's say 4 or 5 hours before delivery, because in the interim, something happened and we have to revise the conditions of the dispatch. So the resulting dispatch on the line IJ, connecting nodes IJ, it's what we have on the left-hand side, and that is the difference in the angles, right? So remember that in power flow, it's originally a set of equations in complex variable. So it's active power, reactive power, and then also the voltages. And so, and the angles are essentially in the DC approximation, we're going to only retain the active power and the angles of these waves, right, between markets. And so these are this is the angle at node I, and this is the angle at the other stream, right? So we have market A has a boundary node I, and market A prime has a boundary node J, and this is the line IJ, and the flow is going to be a function of the angles, and depending upon these angles, the flow is in one direction or the other, right? So the flow can be in this direction or it can be in that direction. So this is a simplification of the actual power flow, and it helps. It's essentially an approximation, so it has some error, but it helps. It is used for scheduling bulk power transfers like this. Okay, so this is the reactance of the line. Okay, so I think I have all the necessary background information for now introducing the actual optimization. And the optimization now is going to be that each market maker has some external input parameters, which are how much are the adjacent markets asking for power. So this delta A prime IJ will be the willingness to pay. For instance, if it is somebody that is wanting to import power, this will be interpreted as how much they're willing to pay per unit of power flow along that line IJ. Okay, so this is an information that is communicated from market A prime to market A. There is also, because these lines are can be congested, they have limited capacity, there could be a capacity charge, capacity price, in case the line has already met its limit. And we're going to call that price mu IJ. So it's just a reflection of the fact that the capacity is limited. And then you need to also, in order to assess this feasibility of how much power you can buy from which neighbor, you're going to have to need their angles, right? So in their dispatch, you're going to have that information be given to you to be able to assess how much power can flow through that line. So as a result, the intraday market clearing and coupling problem. So remember, this is on the short run, you're going to schedule or find the values of delta PA, delta TA, and theta A in blue. This is what you have within your control, is how to adjust the operation of your own power generators, how to adjust the transmission, the flows across the interties. And this is essentially the angles on all the nodes in your network. And the parameters are these two vectors in red, which are the economics, the prices, conditions that your neighbors are demanding, be it for importing or exporting power, and mu is the price of using the capacity on the line that might be congested. So notice that the information from your neighbors, it's also going to be affecting your constraints, right? So it's not just a parameter that affects your objective function, but it also affects the constraints, because in the set of constraints that we're dealing with, the line flow through the lines, through the tie lines, is a function of the angles of the neighboring markets. And so we're going to have the usual demand supply constraints, the internal flow constraints, right? Because you're going to have also a network that you're scheduling flows within. These are the flows with the neighbors, where the dependency with their angles comes into play. And then there could be internal reliability constraints. And so we call the solution to this optimization problem the internal or intraday, because it's an adjustment to what was originally scheduled of internal market generation and coupling or flows with adjacent markets. Okay, for example, so what is an example of this objective function? It could be that you're minimizing the cost of redispatching your own generators. So this function C has been given to you bid by the generator G. So this is something that you as market operator, you have that information already within in your possession. So you know how much it costs to change the operation, the level of production for generator G. You also know, these are the red parameters, right? This is how much your neighbors are asking for power. And so you can increase the inflow of power or export power. So that's why the negative sign is to account for exports if you have a surplus to your neighbors. And then this is the way you're going to be charged for using the line. So you're going to pay half, because for every exchange there is always one party that is importing and another party that is exporting, and we're going to use the convention that they both are charged half what it costs to use that line per unit. So that's why they have here that convention can be changed. It could have been easily done by assigning all the costs to the exporting party or the importing party, but it doesn't really change the structure of the problem. The reliability constraint. So this gives us a sense of what this looks like, right? And now the reliability constraint looks like something like this. We would like to make sure that we are going to meet. So the left-hand side here is the actual flows in the internal to the market. So it's essentially being able to meet demand either by virtue of your power flows internal or by your intertie line flows, and this is demand, the ability to meet demand. So you want to impose a target on how likely it is that you're able to meet demand, and this is a reliability target, right? So it could be, let's say, 0.005 or 0.001. So with that probability, you want to make sure that you're able to supply demand, and that's your internal reliability. Okay, so the market mechanism that we are proposing is as follows: we're going to on a daily basis, or remember that maybe I don't know if I can use a piece of this. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so the timeline is as follows. With a day ahead, in the day ahead market, this is where T and P were set, right? So let's say that this is 24 hours, and then within the day there is we're going to compute an update delta T and delta P for delivery here. So just as it was the case that a dispatch was decided 24-hour anticipation, now we're going to also impose a certain set of rules as to how to compute that update during the day. Okay, so this is a protocol which the market operators are going to talk to each other. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to exchange information, right? And so the information exchange is essentially dictating the terms of trade. Market A communicates to neighboring markets what are the market A's willingness to pay for power or willingness to sell. If it is an exporting region, this is the value of delta. And also the terms, the actual physical terms, which are the angles at which those edge nodes that are going to be the basis for scheduling those tie-line flows. There is a given capacity price, mu of k, that we're going to have to also adjust to recognize the fact that sometimes the line is going to get congested. And once every market operator receives this information, they're going to solve their internal market dispatch, right? And they're going to solve the internal market dispatch, and this is the solution. The solution of the internal market clearing is going to be a set of intertie flows. The resulting line angles at those nodes at the edges, and also how much are they willing to pay for that electricity that is flowing through or from or to or from the transmission line. And because so many things are changing at the same time, right, we're going to have to introduce some sort of a 2-time scale argument for making sure that this thing stabilizes. So this update rule is, as you can see, it's a convex combination of the previous set of flows and the new identified set of flows. And the idea behind this is that we're going to try to enforce a certain element of inertia in the way these changes are being implemented, because rho k, something like the step size, is going to 0, but it's going to 0 slowly. So this updates between the operators is slowly becoming more and more inertial. And the reason for this is that we are wanting for this process to stabilize at some point, right? If we didn't have this rho k going to 0, this will never stabilize. Okay, and of course, the capacity prices have to be adjusted, because if the actual desired flows, so these are, remember, these are the flows. This is the flow that area A wants to schedule on line IJ at it after k rounds of this market coupling mechanism, and this is the area A primes solution for wanting to, how much they want to schedule along that same line after k iterations. So we are updating the excess utilization of the line. Sorry, we're updating the prices in a manner that is reflective of that excess utilization of the line. So you can think of this as a dual step, right? So whereas this is a primal type of update, this will be a dual type of update, right? So in a sense, the market mechanism looks like a primal dual algorithm, except that this is an algorithm in which the updates come from optimization solutions as well, right? So you're coupling the solution of optimization problems, and then on the basis of that, doing these updates. Okay, so what are our assumptions? We're going to assume that the VA is strictly convex in the power flows. This is not a restricted assumption, given the fact that it's on a daily, on an hourly or very short time basis. So all these commitment decisions, for those of you who are familiar with power dispatch, power dispatch is not necessarily convex, because you have to take into account the discrete decision of turning on or off a power plant, right? But here, those within the hour, those plants that are committed, and those plants that are off. So we're not going to change the commitment. We're simply changing the levels at which they are going to be operated. And so that's why assuming convexity is not too strong an assumption. Another assumption is that this is the objective, which is think of this as the cost adjusted by the fact that you're potentially exporting power. It's also increasing in how much power how much you're using the interconnection lines. So if the capacity price increases, that just means you're going to have to pay more. So the VA is strictly monotone increasing in the capacity price. And then these are rather technical assumptions, but that hold in this case, which are that if we denote by FA, script FA of theta minus A, the set of feasible solutions for market clearing for market A, this set of feasible solution is which I denote here by a set value map script F of A. This set value map is continuous, right? So it's not a function, it's a set value map, because it maps the set of potential market clearing solutions as a function of the angles of my neighbors. So that map from angles of my neighbors to feasible solutions, which is a set, that map is continuous. And then for every fixed value of this, sets are closed and convex, which is again a natural assumption to be made in this context of market clearing. The last assumption has to do with that we're trading flexibility. So we're not in the business of essentially trading power itself. And so this it means that even without the intertie transfers, there are feasible solutions to the local market clearing problems, right? So even if I don't trade any power with my neighbors, I do have some feasible solutions within my reach for my market clearing solution. Okay, so these are the assumptions that we made from the outset. And what these assumptions bias is the following results. The first one is that the dual updates are going to eventually converge to a set of prices, mu infinity, right? And that this mu infinity, that in the limit, they're going to satisfy this complementary slackness condition, right? So we're always adjusting this multiply. Think of this as the multi-capacity multipliers, and we're always adjusting them in the sense of that is dictated by whether there is excess utilization or the opposite for the power line. And in the end, we have a complementary slackness condition, which means that if mu infinity happens to be 0, then chances are is because the line is not used up to capacity, and conversely, if this is positive, is because the line has been used up to capacity. Well, that's just one part of the problem. The other part is, well, what happens to the actual internal solutions? So the internal solutions also stabilize. So there is a limiting value where each market stabilizes around a solution. And this limit is a Nash equilibrium of a coupled intraday market clearing with capacity prices mu infinity, right? So if you think about it, I did not introduce this as a game, but you could think of this as a game in that the players are each one of the market operators, and they have their own objective function as dictated by this VA here. Sorry, I don't want to go back. Right, so that could be seen as a game, a non-cooperative game between market operators. The only difference here is that unlike non-cooperative games, standard non-cooperative games, your decisions, the things that you have within your control are constrained, and those constraints are defined indirectly by your competitors or the other players. So this is sometimes refers to as a coupled game or coupled constraint game, because I am wanting to maximize my objective or minimize my cost function, and the solution set that I have to deal with is partly defined by something that my counterparty or counterparties can do or don't. So in this first result, what we're showing is that this process of iteratively adjusting the internal market clearing outcomes in response to the updates of these prices does stabilize, and it stabilizes to a Nash equilibrium. But we can say a little bit more. In the case when all markets use a chance constraints formulation, and this is the I think let me see if I can go back. The chance constraint formulation is the one that we had in. Let me go to the seamless. Yeah. Let me just keep a little bit back, and I'll show you what I mean here. This is the chance constraint formulation, right? So the objective function is just cost. This is internal cost. This is export or imports, and this is capacity along the cost of using the interconnection capacity. And the internal and reliability is modeled by means of this chance constraint in the internal market. If this is the situation, then this second theorem says, sorry, this second theorem says that the Nash equilibrium that we are identifying, it's in fact the optimal coupling of the market. So we can make a slightly stronger claim in that the result of this iteratively adjusting for the internal power flows in response to rescheduling of transmission line power flows is going to also be optimal, but it's essentially optimal from the point of view of an artificial decision maker, because there's nobody really in charge of all the markets, because the market in Germany is one thing, the market in France is another thing. But if there was such a thing as a central view of the whole European Union, this will mean that you are able to identify what would be the optimal way of scheduling the transfers between all these markets while meeting, and this is important, while meeting their internal reliability standards. Okay, so let me show you just a very simple test bed where we have three areas. So remember, this network here is going to be managed by one market maker. This network is also managed by one market maker. And then this is a tiny, simple network in which there's only one node, one generator, and one load. And so what we are looking at here is the basis of this. In this example, the source of randomness is demand here, and demand here, demand here, and demand here. So the randomness comes from demand, which may be because, say, they have intermittent renewables. And so the question is how to schedule changes along these power interconnections so as to meet internal targets for reliability. So that's essentially the problem that we're addressing here. Okay, so this plot just shows the output of this process when market makers behave as we ask them to do. So in red here we have, so you can see this is 0. The line connecting nodes 5 and 6. So that says 5 and 6 here. This line it's going to be seen, there is no adjustment, and there is no adjustment possible because the line is already congested. So you can see these are the prices. The capacity price here in black is not 0, right? This is greater than 0. So this means that for this line T156, it's already up to capacity. So the day ahead dispatch was already using all the capacity in that line. Hence, it's not possible to change to introduce changes in the schedule flow along that line. There's a very different situation in line 915. So 915, is this one here. In this one, there's going to be a flow minus 20. So this means there's going to be power flowing in this sense, right? And you can see that the capacity price is going to 0 because it's not going to be used up to capacity. And these are the differences between the blue is what area, what this area is demanding, what this area is willing to pay for that power flow. And the red is what this area is willing to charge for that power flow. And so you can see there is consensus here. This is essentially, they are very quickly, they figured out the scale of the amount of power that is. Notice there's a lot of oscillation here, right? And this oscillation has to do with figuring out which at what point is and which line is going to be congested, right? So we start out with this starting condition that this line is already up to capacity, but that is already relaxed. I mean, we're relaxing that. We're saying, okay, what if we were to not use that line up to capacity, which will mean an update, an adjustment downwards, or a delta T that would reduce the amount of power flow along that line, right? And that completely changes the nature of the problem, right? The fact that you have a line that is available all of a sudden makes you wanna schedule a certain type of power flow. The moment you realize that this line is would have to be congested, because that's what this iterative adjustment process is going to lead to, then again, you go from that end to the other end, right? And this is why it was necessary to have this diminishing step size. You know, the diminishing step size is what helping these independent market operators, in a sense, reach a consensus, agreeing as to which lines are going to end up being utilized up to capacity. Okay, so it takes about on the order of 60 iterations. So for actual implementation, if you were to run this on a, you know, a high performance laptop or whatever, it would be a question of less than a minute. So this back and forth at the end of the day between the networks, between the market makers, could have also a communication overhead. So imagine, what are the communication requirements between all these market makers? They're having to share these parameters, in turn solve their internal market dispatch, and then eventually, after roughly 60 or so rounds of this, they're going to be able to settle into what is actually the way they're going to schedule the dispatch. So this suggests that, well, of course, this is a very stylized example, but in other simulations that we have done, larger scale simulations, the implications are that it might be feasible from a computational standpoint to do this in real time in order to be able to accommodate this type of protocol. So to summarize, and I'm going to close, we have proposed a decentralized market mechanism. Decentralized, so each market is constantly revisiting or solving anew their internal market clearing optimization problem. And why are they doing that? Because they want to exchange flexibility. They want to see which one of the markets is able to take a significant swing in the way the power is scheduled. So what is critical, I think, is that we're giving market operators a lot of local control. And this is very important because they are the ones who have the know-how and the wherewithal to handle internal reliability constraints. They know their area, and rather than passing a highly stylized model to a higher, more abstracted level, they are dealing with it themselves. And the idea is that there's this iterative sharing, but the sharing is actually not, it's limited. It doesn't mean here that everything is being centralized, as it is the case in the European market, where all the bids from all the participants are being centralized. This is all handled locally. So what is being shared is the conditions on the interties. So it's limited information that is used for updating the market clearing solution. And we have shown that the process converges to a Nash equilibrium, and the Nash equilibrium has certain optimality properties under certain conditions. So it's, in a sense, an efficient outcome under certain conditions. So with this, I thank you, and I'll be glad to take some questions.